Hello everyone, this is the FPL Wire and this is Pras, and I'm joined by the Oracle of Man City predictions. Everyone knows Luke, who does excellent Man City predictions as well as a great FPL player. Very glad to have you, Luke. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. That was a kind welcome. Yeah, no, good to be on a pod with you, Praz. It's been a long time. I think we've tried to make it happen numerous times over the last few years, and for whatever reason, it's just not happened. So good to finally be here.
Indeed. And I'm in the privileged position of asking you the right questions. I think the template has started to form in a very meaningful way after the Jesus injury, the Nkunku injury, and sort of people are conforming. And then the hope is, as always, that if you can pick the right Man City players, maybe you can break the template. So we're going to try and do that for everyone who's listening and watching. Luke's going to help us decipher who the picks could be in the very complex puzzle. And obviously, we are podding on the back of the Community Shield, which Arsenal won after a penalty shootout. So we'll talk about that. And of course, most importantly, what Luke thinks the lineups, the formations could be going forward. So what I'm going to do is first, before we kick off, just talk about Fantasy Football Scout. This is the final week before Game Week 1 kicks off. And they still have a 30% off on their members area. So please do check it out. In fact, the data and some of the minutes trackers that we use are coming from the Fantasy Football website. So do check that out. Let's go into the main part of the pod. So I'm going to start with, Luke, something that you've been doing for 3 years now, I think, which is predicting the lineups with the help of Emma, who's on the slide at the rate Jump the Wave. And tell us about it, on how you sort of got on doing it and how you've been so successful at it.
Yeah, so it's kind of a little bit of coincidence, I guess, with the Emma thing. Personally, I'm just a guy on Twitter who's played fantasy football for a long time. I used to work with Fantasy Football Scout many years ago. I just took it upon myself, to be honest, to try and work out Man City. I think 3 years ago now, if I remember rightly, Man City had just done what they did at the end of this season, where the back end of the season they'd already won the league and they started messing around and no one could pick any of their players and it was all over the place, and all the noise was you can't pick Man City players, they're all over the place. And I wasn't happy with that. I was just like, I really want to be able to pick these players because they are some of the best players in the league. Obviously, they are the best team in the league. It would be nice to be able to predict them and put them in my team. And it just turned into like an almost personal quest where I thought I'll give this a go by myself, just see if I can be successful in it, predicting the team. So I started doing it myself and just posting it on Twitter just for fun more than anything. I didn't even expect to necessarily be successful. Kind of learning on the job, trying to work out how he was going about it. I think the classic thought process at that time, at least, was, you play this week, probably not going to play the next week. That seemed to be a thing I see on Twitter all the time, and I think that's what got a lot of people into trouble into trying to predict it. By chance, I noticed about 6-7 weeks into it that someone alerted me to Emma at Jump the Wave, who was sort of tracking numerous predictors and how they were doing on Man City. I think maybe it was just Man City all the time, or maybe one other team. So at that point, I thought, well, if she's going to do all the hard work for me and track all my stats so I don't have to worry about it, that sounds perfect to me. So I jumped on board with her. She took over tracking all of the predictions and I just continued to pump it out on Twitter. So first season went really well, ended up being the top predictor. I think something like 9.6 out of 10 across the season on average, removing the goalkeeper, which is really good, much better than I had expected anyway. And that followed into season 2. Didn't have quite as much time to do as detailed threads as I did before, but ended up being the top predictor again. I think it was about 9.4, so less across the season. But I think with the end of the season that we had, again, similar to that 3 seasons ago, and then also that period just after the World Cup where a lot of players kind of fell out of favour, made it very hard for predictors. So that brought our average down quite a lot across the whole season. So yeah, that kind of just fell into it, to be honest. And it became like a thing that I think we were talking just before the pod. I'm like a very all-in person. I either do it all in or don't bother. It's kind of my makeup, I guess. And because I'd committed to it, I thought, well, I'm just going to keep doing it. And I think we're going to talk about. I'm probably going to give it up for this season, to be honest, because it is just a huge commitment to actually spend the time to do it. It's I've got two kids. I'll be in a park and I'm on my phone, like looking for news and information and want to put something out, and it's just not really fair to them. It's also like I work shift work, so I work Saturdays and Sundays. If I want to put out stuff that I'm confident in, I have to go back and watch those matches, and it's just a commitment to then fit those matches in as well. And it's just I'm getting older, man, so it's not as easy to fit it in, unfortunately.
We've all
But
been there, staring at our phones in the park. But no, like
yeah,
look, I think you're making the right call, and I think for people, I think obviously you'll still be on Twitter, you'll still be in the engaged discussions. When there are marquee moments, you'll be helping us out with threads. You just won't be sort of competing on a, or maybe competing is not even the right word, helping on a weekly basis in this initiative.
absolutely, yeah, that's the plan anyway.
Okay, so Emma basically also let me know that I should alert people that they are looking for more predictors. So if you are a fan, I mean now because the teams have stacked up, it used to be City 3 years ago. Now pretty much it's difficult to predict Arsenal's number eight. It's difficult to predict Man United. So they need predictors for pretty much City, Newcastle, Brighton, Spurs, Chelsea, Arsenal, Man United, Liverpool, Villa. So if you're a fan, if you're keen to sort of get involved in predicting your team's lineups, please reach out to Emma. The Twitter handle is on the visual that you can see, which is at Jump the Wave. So that's on predictions. So Luke's really good at it, and we're gonna make sure that we can get as much out of Luke today in this podcast. And let's first go to Man City and talk about what they've done this summer. Obviously, an amazing treble, much to the disappointment of Man United fans. They emulated the treble and frankly deserved it because they've been on the cusp of winning the Champions League for a while, and domestically they've been doing terrifically. But outside in, they've lost a key player in Gundogan. They've lost I mean, not as key, but a first 13, 14 player in Mahrez who was in and out, but played some of the key games. They haven't really replaced them. Kovacic has come in. Guardiola might come in and strengthen the defense. So, what's your thoughts in terms of this transfer activity?
Yeah, obviously it's not really my bag. I just kind of deal with whatever's in front of me. But I will say, I think in this system, and we know Pep's used multiple systems over the years, and even within seasons, he will tweak and change them. Obviously, on a match dependent situation, he will change systems slightly, but quite broad shift that's happened over his time there. I mean, we all think of like the Sané and Sterling era, and the no centre forward era, and then you've got Haaland coming. Like, there's been big changes across the team. I think losing Gundogan is really quite key in this setup, as we saw even at I think he's 32, 33. Classically more of even a DM and then a central midfielder, and Pep kind of turned him into almost a shadow striker at times, or a late runner into the box. And there wasn't anyone else who really kind of liked to do that job, to be honest, or trusted to do that job with the same, I'll say, defensive nous as well that he needed in some games. So losing him, he's also the captain as well. It's going to have a big impact. I think Pep talked about it in the build up to this game that Foden might be the one who will play that position, and even then actually mentioned, but he needs to work on some of his defensive game essentially.
Yeah.
And then we saw from the Arsenal lineup, he didn't fully trust him to put him in centre midfield from the beginning. So that's a common question that I know FPL players will have. But I think finding the solution of what they do, if they're going to stick with this same setup, is quite hard. I think we got a little bit of an answer for a tough game. We saw in Arsenal, I tweeted before the game, I felt Kovacic will probably play this game.
Yeah.
And as a result, he tweaked it slightly. Kovacic didn't really play as an 8, he more played in the pivot in midfield and stopped Stones inverting. So I think we kind of got, that's one of the big questions for this season really, is how much is Kovacic going to play and where's he going to fit into the system? Well, we find out in a big game, at least, or against a tough opponent, he's more going to sit than play as an aggressive 8. So yeah, there's changes and it's going to be quite tough to work out. We're probably going to have to use the information from the first few games to sort of build a live picture. But yeah, it's he's definitely the big loss for me. I think Mahrez is definitely a loss as well. Like there's been times when he's been really key for Man City and then not so key. He's got like a love-hate thing with Pep that he often talks about in the media as well. I think with Mahrez, what he gives you is he just gives you some goals from out wide that they don't really have at the moment, and he's very useful for picking off weaker opposition in cups if they want to put him in. He was very useful at one point. He was his Champions League go-to at one point as well because he has that control on the wing. Obviously he can score penalties. Well, one of the better ones in their team. Even his records are not that great, but their general penalty taking for Man City has been pretty awful over the years. So yeah, he's been a key player. So to lose him as well when they're quite weak in the wider, not weak, they've got world-class players, but depth-wise, they haven't got too many. So yeah, losing those two guys is quite substantial, I would say, and have a knock-on effect.
So before we get to Guardiola, let's first talk replacement. So I mean, of course, you can't predict who comes in, but you know what I'm hearing in the news. For example, Mitoma. Mitoma is obviously a right-sided player, suits more towards the left. What do you think? I mean, would a Mitoma type signing, if that happens, would that ever be something that Pep tries on the right?
Well, in my mind, the position they'd want to play someone in would be the right wing spot, is that Mara's spot.
Yeah,
To shift Grealish out of that position is going to be a tough ask because he pretty much does what Pep wants in this era, which is control on the wings.
yeah.
That's why Foden has fell foul of the system in recent times. People are always wondering, like, how can you not play Foden? He's so good, and every time I was on the pitch, he shows he's so good. Well, it's because Pep doesn't want him on the wings, basically, and there wasn't a position for him in the middle. Because Grealish is kind of the player he wants in that scenario. So Matoma, if it was Matoma to me, I kind of think he would probably try and convert him into a right winger, like as in play him on the right side. Um, I can't really see how he would play Matoma and Grealish together unless he had some plan to bring Grealish into the centre, but we've not really seen that at all. So it doesn't really make sense to me
Yeah,
unless it's just competition. As we've said, the player he wants different options all the time and he doesn't want to play Foden out there. Then maybe Matoma and Grealish would battle for the left wing, but to me, they'd be more interested in a right winger, and therefore it might be with the theory to sort of convert him into a right winger spot.
yeah. And then, of course, the other one out there is Bernardo Silva. Obviously, started today. We remember in the celebrations, Grealish telling him not to go. I mean, there was a lot of speculation that he might leave.
Mm.
Again, not being in ITK or anything, but that would be a massive loss, right? This close to the season, so you'd think that he might just stay.
Yeah, I absolutely love Bernardo Silva. I think he's like one of the best players in the world, like unquestionably, and in multiple positions as well. That season where he was in the double pivot, um, he was unreal, and he didn't really use him much there at all in recent times. Yeah, the Silva thing's tricky. It's the thing that Pep does though. At the end of the day, he just says, "Look, at the end of the day, if you want to go, then that's fine. We'll let you go. We just you need to get the right money for you." And Bernardo Silva should be very expensive because he's very, very good. So as far as I understand it, they haven't really received that money, and Silva's kind of like, I suppose, kind of nonchalant about it. It feels like anyway, like, "Oh, I'll go if someone offers me, but if I don't, I'll stay anyway, and I won't moan about it." Which is fine. So professional, you could say. At the end of the day, he's told him he probably wants to leave, but he's happy to play if he's that's the message we seem to getting. I think it would be a big loss. I mean, if they lose Silver as well, that's they're suddenly down to basically Grealish, Foden, and Palmer on the rings, and
Exactly.
that's not a lot of players.
I mean, they would look to sign anyone for Mahrez, but if Bernardo leaves, I think that they'll definitely get one. So that's basically a question mark. We can only play the cards that we have at the moment, so we'll stick to that. Let's come to defense, and again, just staying with how in flux that defense is. I mean, there's been speculation of Walker possibly leaving. He obviously started today. There's been speculation on Laporte. I think that one is more meaningful. Cancelo is hanging around still, and they've signed Guardiola. So, thoughts in defense on how much sort of this will expect it to be, or change, or expected to change?
Yeah, Gavridel's basically a done deal, isn't it? So he's coming in. I think Laporte will go. It's gone quiet. Like we haven't heard anything about that. Doesn't really make sense to me. They just signed Ake just signed a new contract. Obviously, Gavridol is expected to kind of play in his position, I would suggest. That's two very good players for that position. And then Laporte is obviously a third. Yes, he can play as a centre back as well. And he's excellent himself. So I don't know. It just makes sense that Laporte will leave. That was all the information that was coming out. A lot of that's based on him not getting the playing time and stuff. And how can they convince him he's going to get the playing time with Gavridol being signed? I'm not sure they can. So I expect he will go. It's just trying to find someone who wants him apparently, which is mad to me because I'd bite your hand off. Um, yeah, the Walker one, I think they really want him to stay. I think we're going to go through some formations. He's just really, really key in certain games. Like, I'm not the biggest Walker fan overall, but what I can say is that he is extremely adaptable to plans that Pep makes and tactical shifts in the game. And he does offer that sort of one, as we know, that 1v1 defending in big games versus a winger. There's not many players that can do it as well as him. So I think they're very keen to keep him. Ultimately, if he wants to go, like I've already discussed, and the offer's there, then eventually they probably will just let him go. But it's looking more and more likely to me that he might stay. So I don't know. We'll see on that one. But I think they definitely want to keep him.
Right. Okay. I mean, I guess moving on from transfers, there is still enough out there to sort of change things semi-dramatically. I mean, if a Bernardo leaves, that's a little bit more dramatic than maybe if a Laporte or Walker leaves. But to be determined. And this is one of the things where the transfer window is open until end of game week 2, or between game week 2 and game week 3. So one to monitor. But let's go to now preseason. So what I've got up here is basically the minutes that the Man City players have played all of preseason. So this doesn't include the Community Shield, obviously that's just finished. But an interesting point here, and firstly I should say this is all from FF Scout members area. So they actually have this per team, so you can check for any team, any player. And you see here actually Alvarez has got the most minutes so far in preseason, and he obviously started today. Ruben Diaz has played a lot of minutes, Bernardo Silva, Jack Grealish. Foden's had a decent, I mean, he played 45 in the first two, but then played 54 in the last game against Atletico Madrid. And then it sort of just comes down in terms of who has not got a lot of minutes. I think one thing was De Bruyne hadn't played a minute before today. And Ake had played very few minutes before today, 45 and 29, and didn't actually play Atletico Madrid. So, and Cancelo's got 45 minutes and a bit as well. I guess that's not something we'll discuss today. Kovacic got 45, 36. I guess he's been giving everyone minutes and not a lot of minutes to anyone. So, first question to you as we think about Community Shield, was it just basically another game of giving people minutes, or was it anything more than that in terms of starting lineup?
I think it was a little bit more than that, but I mean, Pep himself said after the game, I don't know if you've seen his quotes today, was about getting minutes in the legs. And I think the thing that actually stands out above all else in that is that they've only played 3 other games. Like pre-seasons just seem to get shorter and shorter and less useful for the top teams. It's more like a money-making bag these days, isn't it? Rather than actually being any good for the players. So I know there's a bit of he's kind of selling that with the minutes. I'm sure he would have liked to win the game as well, but I don't necessarily disagree. I think if you look at all the players that are near the top of that minutes thing in preseason, you'll see that the vast majority of those are the ones that played the game today, so the ones in the fittest state. But no, they are obviously most of those are actually the first team players as well, I would suggest. So it's a bit of both. As we're going to talk about, he likes to set up the team differently for different opponents, and I think versus Arsenal, he sees them as the strongest opponent in the league, I would suggest. So therefore, they're going to set up very differently, like in a game like that, than they would, during the season versus a Nottingham Forest at home or whatever. So, yeah, I think you can read into it for a big game again. If you say he was going to play Arsenal again, would it be a similar setup? But yeah, it probably would be a very similar setup. Yeah.
I mean, this isn't an Arsenal pod, but I think goes similar. Like people will read into the 11 that started today very heavily, but a very simple to understand example is Rice started alongside Partey. There's no way Rice is starting against Nottingham Forest, or not, Rice and Partey are starting against Nottingham Forest. It's unlikely. So it is horses for courses, and in this case, obviously, um, the way Man City shaped up and the personnel were according to playing the second best team in the league.
Yeah,
So
and even Havertz up front, right? I don't think you can say for sure that he would play up front versus, is it Nottingham Forest to play first? I think Nketiah has got a decent chance in that game, right? But people will have written him off now as a result. So, yeah, definitely one to bear in mind, I think.
all right, let's go then. We're going deeper into Man City. So let's go to the Community Shield today. I'm just going to read out the guys who started. I guess people have followed it, but you had this setup with initially people thought Stones would invert, and you'll talk about the game and the formation, which ended up happening. But it was, on paper when the lineup came out, at least SofaScore had it as Walker, Diaz, and Akanji in defense. You had Stones and Rodri in midfield, and then Bernardo Silva, Alvarez, Kovacic, Grealish as the four, and then Haaland. But ultimately, it was very different, right?
Yeah, I think I've sent you some slides, haven't you? If you go to the second team, I did all these before the Community Shield came out, but I think the second team, which hopefully kind of shows a bit of a lopsided setup, is that the one you
Yeah,
might have
I've
up on your
got that
screen?
up.
Okay, so this is he did like almost a slight variation of this team, I would say. So here, this is more where, and we saw it in the friendly actually versus Atletico more, where he pushed Walker down the right side and he had Stones kind of invert from central defense rather than right back. So in the setup today, Walker sat in the three, um, well, four actually, because Stones didn't really come out, and then Kovacic went deep next to Rodri.
Yeah.
As a result, and you can see there, I've got the KDB Alvarez Foden slot. That kind of answers why Foden didn't wasn't nailed to start the game. I would say because Kovacic has taken one of those 8 spots essentially, which is now a withdrawn 8 and becoming the pivot because he's not inverting from the back. Stop me if this gets getting too complicated.
Oh, no, no. I think this is good. Yeah.
Um, it means that there was only one spot really if he was going to use Silva on the wing, and I think everyone knows in big games he will use Silva on the wing. Like I didn't think that was in question today particularly. Silva was probably going to play on that wing spot. Therefore, if he's going to use Kovacic as the other 8 in the traditional 3-2-2-3 setup, there's only one spot that either Alvarez, Kevin De Bruyne, or Foden can then take in that team. And today he gave it to Alvarez. Now that would be partly because he's the fittest player and he's had a lot of minutes, as we've just seen. It's also because he has been the understudy for Kevin De Bruyne many times. I think in the Champions League final, Foden actually did do it, and the long-term plan is probably to work him into it. I think today Alvarez again showed he's obviously a very good player, very young, but I don't think many City fans are actually buying into this whole using him in the De Bruyne slot as a number 8. They don't really like it, and it hasn't really worked out that well overall. So I think over time, eventually, we might see the end of that. But essentially what you see in front of you, this team here, was like a slight variation of that setup. And I think that's what we can expect when Kovacic is going to play, he will end up sitting a bit deeper and you might see more of a flat setup at the back, not inverting essentially.
Right.
And that's pretty much to deal with a really strong opponent.
So this is, let's say this is the first half team. Obviously you've got Guardiola here. Akanji played instead. He was actually pretty forward as well. I mean, I saw he wasn't basically playing the left centre back or left-sided centre back. He was also, you could almost think the position you have for Walker here, maybe that was Akanji. Was that tactical, or was it basically he'll attack from both Walker and Akanji in this particular setup?
Yeah, so that was so the second half, I think that happened more. I didn't catch a lot of the first half. I just got back from the cinema, Oppenheimer, so turned it on
Right.
like a little way through the first half. But in the second half, particularly, which I paid attention to, they kind of changed it a little bit. So if you go to, I think the final slide that I gave you,
Yeah.
which
Team
I'm
four.
pretty sure, yeah, so I'm pretty sure this was the team that ended up finishing the game or close to it.
Yeah.
So what people will probably notice straight away here is that actually, if you just ignore all the names, it's pretty much their exact setup in their default 3-2-2-3 setup that they do, 5 back, 5 forward. It's just more about where the players come from to enter that space. So we can see here we've got Diaz, Rodri, Stones. So in the game in the second half versus Arsenal, Rodri kind of stepped into the defence and became part of almost a back 3 with Stones and Diaz. We had Silva drift off into the bottom left areas and De Bruyne sit a bit deeper. He then pushed the 2 wingers inside. So that was Foden and Palmer at the time, as he brought Foden on for Grealish and Palmer came on in the right wing spot and they actually moved into the middle. And
Right.
then Walker and Akanji ended up bombing forward and actually providing the width. It wasn't as pronounced as this. This is just to show like what the general, and sometimes it would be more on one side than the other. Maybe it would just be Walker, then it would just be Akanji. But as you can see, it kind of ends up in the same shape. It's just that the players filling that have come from a different position. So Walker and Akanji filled that width, and Foden and Palmer moved inside. I think if you've got slide 1, which I think is team 1, is going to be the setup that people are more used to, the traditional setup where most start games, and you'll see that it's very, very similar. It's just, yeah, the way it ended up chasing a goal. I can only assume it's because he's talked about Arsenal and man-to-man marking and zonal, and it's just trying to confuse the opponent, right? To see where players are going to move into different positions. Walker's suddenly he's in a back 3, then he might be inverting into midfield sometimes, then suddenly he's bombing on down the right wing. It's extremely hard to keep a track of, right?
Right. Indeed. So, I guess I mean I'm sharing the teams as you're talking about them, but let's step back a little bit. Let's come out of the Community Shield. Let's talk about what we think, how we think the team would set up on a base case level. Of course, no one can it will be dependent on the opponent, but you've got 4 variations here, which I've shown basically the team 4 and team 1. But I'm starting now with team 1. So let's talk a team that, Guardiola has joined. You've got basically everybody fit. You've got a few names up here in terms of who you think play in this formation. If you can talk us through how likely is this as a formation against easier teams, against tougher teams, and within that, you sometimes have this percentage likelihood of this guy starting versus the others. Let's talk about team 1 a little bit on your thoughts there.
Yeah, so I think this is, if we're, again, there's obviously guesswork here, but going by last season and the players that are currently in the squad, this is kind of going to be his go-to setup, and this will be like the default for me versus in a game where they're expected to win. So if you just imagine, I don't know, home to, I don't know, West Ham or something like that.
Yeah.
I imagine this is kind of the default that I almost imagine it like whether Pep works like this or not is like this is what he plonks on the board, and then he thinks, what can I change here or there to actually get at the opponent, and starts to move pieces around. And maybe he goes crazy in some people's mind and goes beyond what's needed. But this is kind of the default setup. Like you'll notice here, I've put a substitute for each position. This is kind of like the most likely to play it if that person doesn't. That's not an exhaustive list. Like I've left Laporte completely out. I've just assumed he's left. In the right wing spot there, we've also got Palmer,
Mhm.
who could play in that spot as well, stuff like that. So it's definitely not exhaustive, but I think in most games this will be the default setup in a game such as that.
Right,
Uh,
and I'm conscious people are reading, so or listening to this, so I'll just read it out. So it's got Edison in goal, Guardiola, Diaz, and Akanji in defense in that three, and then Stones inverting alongside Rodri, which we're familiar with from last year, and then you have Silva who's playing the Gundogan role, and KDB who's played there, and then Foden holding the width. I guess he'll be more wide in this particular formation. Grealish doing what Grealish does, and then Haaland up top. So, sorry, go on.
no, I was just going to say that the two players there that I don't think you can ever be 100% sure of are definitely going to be the Silva and Foden, like you just alluded to. I think in some games where it's against an incredibly deep block, and he used it against Atletico Madrid where Foden played on the right in the friendly, and he used it previously. You're going to see maybe he uses someone like Foden from the right wing cutting in and trying to get behind him a little bit. So if they're playing against, like, say, a Nottingham Forest, you might see it more likely that he plays there. But I think that'll be the hardest position to sort of grasp. Is Foden going to play this eight or right wing? And that comes a lot down to what we've already seen with Pep. Does he trust him enough to play him in those central games? Well, against the team like Forest, he probably don't need the defensive qualities as much. So maybe Foden will end up in the middle. Like that'll be the bit that will always be guesswork. Which one is he cooked up? I think Silva and Foden may even interchange during the game multiple times. But in this setup, yeah, Foden will either be right or as one of those eights probably.
And in terms of Bernardo Silva, I mean, there was a couple of seasons back where he regularly played that position alongside De Bruyne, right? I mean, so that's not really a big change. I think the bigger sacrifice is that control on the right, where, as you say, if it's an easier team, then he's happy to give up a little bit of that control.
Yeah, the negative of this is obviously until if they do sign someone is like Silva's not really the goal getter that Gundogan is in that spot, so they kind of lose that from there. And then on the right, obviously, yeah, you sacrifice a bit of control. They'll ask for the goals to come from right wing, but we know that can happen. I think Foden scored his hat trick versus Man United from the right wing, so it definitely can happen. It's just yeah, the goal threat. And I think even today, like Alvarez playing over Foden for me was probably even just to add that little bit of goal threat as well because he could have picked Foden, but literally everyone else in the entire team was focused around control. Like who else was scoring goals in that team if it wasn't Haaland? Really, there isn't that many goal getters in there. So to play that second striker rather than Foden may have impacted in that a little bit. So yeah, it sounds strange because Man City are going to score a bag load of goals. Everyone knows that. But there isn't that many actual out and out goal scorers in their team now. I would say outside Haaland, is he just going to score like 50,
Become
60?
yeah, and it
Maybe.
changed last year, right? I mean, I think last year, at least for me as an outsider, it felt like the wingers are the most peripheral that I remember them being over the last few seasons. They've always been wide.
Facilitators more than
Yeah,
anything, aren't they? Yeah.
they're all now sort of become where they're feeding into Holland, and that's been a little bit of a shift, which also sort of plays into why a lot of people have just Holland in their FPL team, even though this is the
Mm.
team that is expected to keep most clean sheets and score the most goals. So let's stick with just a couple of more questions on Team One. In terms of defense, if we're saying this is the base case team, so you're saying from the new signing, Guardiola, Ake is the one that misses out because him being left-footed and being comfortable both as a left back as well as a left centre back. Is that
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, there's some guesswork, but I think that's pretty common consensus that that's probably the likely thing to happen here in this setup. I don't see where else Gabriel would play unless he's aiming to replace Diaz. I mean, can't see that, can you? So I think it's got to be that left centre back really, and that's unfortunate for Ake because I think he's more than just a really good defender. I actually just think he's just a really good player and he's good on the ball. But by all accounts, and I haven't seen him too much myself, Gabriel's just absolutely amazing at it as well, and is that step up. So I think it'll almost be a case of what we saw last season, where he says, in an easier game where they need build up, they'll play Laporte, and in a game where they need a 1v1 defender who's a little bit better or a box presence, they'll play Ake. And you're probably going to see the same setup now, where Gabriel's going to play because most games are easy for Man City. Let's be honest. So Gabriel will play the majority, and occasionally he might use Ake for a 1v1 versus Saka, or wherever it might be, or whatever. Plus, they're in about a million competitions and they seem to go really far in them. So everyone's going to get games. But
correct?
obviously, as FPL players, we're only interested in the Premier League. So Gavridol, yeah, looks to probably be first choice. Whether that will happen straight away, I mean, who knows? He's only just signed, right? How fit he is and everything, I don't know. It may take a little while, but that'll be the plan, I imagine.
So as just completing defense, Akanji is the 5 million defender here. I guess cheapest in that back line. He's the right-footed guy sharing minutes with Walker. Or how nailed do you think he would be in this setup?
Yeah, I wouldn't be prepared to chance it. Akanji's just like a really good all-round player. As we saw today, he was playing almost like left wing. He can play obviously that Gavriel and Ake role. He can play the central back role. He did that when Diaz was injured as well when he first moved to the system, and he can definitely play that right centre back role. We've even seen him invert in midfield in some games instead of Stones. So that guy can literally play everywhere. So I think he's kind of going to be a victim to that really, where he will end up getting a lot of minutes. It just could be in any random position in any game to cover. I think in that default versus a really easy team, he's probably preferable to Walker in that spot because he is good on the ball. He's better than Walker on the ball. It just come down to whether Pep wants to either worry about the defense and the counter, and then he'll probably use Walker, or if he wants to use Walker and push forward down the wing, then he'll probably use him. But otherwise, Akanji just offers a lot more in ball playing, so I think he will get that spot in those type of games.
And I'm putting you on the spot if you don't know, but does he come on? Like, if people are thinking maybe I'll go one sub and I'll get a Kanji as my 5 million. If he doesn't start, then he doesn't come on, or do you think it's random?
Um, yeah, I'd have to go back and check 100%, but I will say that players that have been benched in the past will have come on to shore up things in the last 10 minutes or offer something different. So Pep's strange, right? Sometimes he goes through games where he doesn't make any subs at all. He's completely happy with the people he's gone out there and you won't see any subs, and that does happen. But then there'll be other times where he'll bring Diaz on for the last 8 minutes. Like, so I don't think you can hang your hat on like he definitely won't come on. I think games are now potentially a few minutes longer as well, aren't they? So I suppose you've got even more time to use those five subs. So I wouldn't be comfortable chancing it.
Right. So verdict in defense: Diaz is the nailed guy, and Stones, between Diaz and Stones, I think Diaz a little bit more than Stones, but both are good.
I think both can definitely be picked at this stage of the season. I think Diaz is, to me, it would pretty much only be injury that would stop him playing. In all of the teams that we're probably going to go through and look at, Diaz is like the main guy there. It's just his leadership qualities. He is playing so well as well. There was a period where he went through where he wasn't at his top level, and he got dropped a little bit, like a season before, like a few times. But outside that, since he's been at Man City, he has been like the main man, to be honest, ever since he came. So I'd be surprised if he didn't play. Like the games don't come that thick and fast. I know they've got is it Super Cup game sort of after game week 1 or game week 2? I can't remember
Between
now.
game week 1 and 2.
Between game week 1 and 2, and then I think Champions League is towards the end of August, right? I think it's like game week 8 or
Week
9 or
5.
something. Oh, is it game week 5? Okay. But again, the Champions League these days, especially the group stages, the teams are weaker than the other Premier League sides. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is. So I wouldn't necessarily worry now. That'll be for the future, maybe against like a big Champions League side. You might see Diaz rested on occasion, but we don't have to worry about that now. I'd say Diaz is pretty locked for the first 8, 9 games of the season. Like I'd be surprised if he doesn't start. With Stones, you can always see that maybe he will drop out just simply because he is so injury prone. They do have to look after him. He is really important. But I think if all else is well, like none of that is an issue, then he would play the vast majority. Like out of 9 games, I would say he'd probably play like 8, maybe even 9. And that might be quite brave because we know what it's like. But I think it's only really injury that would really hold him back. I just think he is really important in this setup. And the games are of the type where he can play pretty much every one.
And in your view, is the attacking threat? I mean, I think people overplay Stones' attacking threat just because he's inverting. But in your view, is there, basically you're countering a little bit less nailedness versus a little bit more attacking threat. Where do you fall on that? I mean, do you think Stones is worth it, or is the attacking threat not high enough, and you just go for Diaz?
Yeah, the stats don't really bear out this attacking threat at all, do they? But I think
Yeah.
it's kind of strange because when you watch him, it feels like he does get the odd chance every now and then. And he has been known to score. I mean, he scored a brace before, I remember, but that starts souring our memory. I guess it's not really what he's all about. I just think because in certain games, right? So let's say they're playing this setup versus Forest. Stone's not really going to be sat as deep as that. Like the inversion almost goes out the window. He pretty much ends up camped on the edge of the penalty area. So although the stats may not show that he's had a massive goal threat, I think he's only really started doing it towards the back end of last season, like the last 10 or 11 games. And even then, we know that they'd won the league. So then they started messing around. So maybe we just haven't seen it in the stats yet that it might bear fruit. I think by just being closer to the goal, you've obviously got a little bit more chance of the ball just popping off to you. And the thing is, he seems quite like he's quite a good finisher of the ball and he's just got that instinct and knack. So I know it's a bit out there because the stats don't say it, but I would have thought like most that Stones would end up getting more attacking returns as a result of being in that position. So I think it's a fair comment that at the end of the day, if the stats continue to be low and he's just not achieving it, just you just hold your hands up and go, okay, it is what it is. But I think there's a chance that starts to creep up just from his position alone, to be honest.
Great. So Before I go to attack, in defense, on a base case, of course, we'll look at a couple of other formations. You like no City, from again putting an FPL lens, no City defender because it's low upside and risk, or a City defender, and if so, who do you prefer between Stones and Diaz?
I think it's more than viable to use a Man City defender from the beginning. Like you can, it's one of those. Yeah, I've looked at the team myself, and it's just like I can put one in or I can not put one in, just with the pricing at the moment, and I'd be happy either way. I wouldn't push anyone either way. I think those fixtures are good enough where you could just put either one of DS or Stones in. And I don't know about you, but I've looked at the rotations over the first sort of 8 or 9 weeks, and they pretty much play every week. Like it ends up being that case for me, just with my other defenders that I've got, which is the same as everyone. I assume Gabriel, Estupinan, etc. Um, so yeah, I'm more than happy to chance it, but I think those other guys have got good games as well. So I wouldn't want to push it either way. I currently got Stones in my team, and I think I'm probably going to go with that and just play him every week. If you are not a person who can cope with worrying about the team lineup or just think he's likely to get injured or whatever, then DS is more than fine, and that's the way to go if you just want to rest easy at night. Like just go with DS.
You heard it here. Luke has Stones in his team. All right, let's go. Let's go to, and of course you're more than okay to change it later. That's the other thing, right? People will swear by Luke said Stones is great, but okay. So let's go in attack. So my question to you. So we know about Foden now. We know Foden could play five positions, and basically this basically not me Pep saying it. He could play in the middle. He could play on the right. Pep thinks he could play up front. He clearly should get more minutes. But my question to you is there's two questions. Number one, in this new format of how Pep sets up, is it even worth going for him versus other options that are around the 8 million that are either on penalties or even in 6.5? And the second question is, why bother with Foden when then Grealish is right there and he's going to play every single or pretty much every single game?
Those are both really good questions. They're really good questions. Um, I can't make that decision for someone else, right? If they want to go for Foden, I think he will play the vast majority of the games to begin with because of the opponent, as we discussed. As to what position that is and what minute he comes off and stuff, there's also performance relation here. At the end of the day, if a Foden's not performing, and that goes for anyone in Man City's team, Pep won't hesitate to get rid of them. So he has to perform when he's in that role. So is he better than the other options around that are nailed and take penalties? No, not in my opinion. I think you just go for them if you want to. Foden is very much that. I hope Man City are going to win 4 or 5-0 in every single game versus these players. He's going to play, even if he doesn't play all the minutes, he plays quite a lot of them and he gets a large slice of that. And I can see that thinking, but and it could well happen, but it's I think we've got a lot of years now of proof almost that that's extremely hard thing to actually achieve with him. There are some players like Baker goes on about how he helps his season every time on average FPL.
Right.
He's a friend of yours. And there will always be a period where Foden comes in and does really, really well. But timing that is very hard. And then you've obviously got the transfers in and out as well. And you think, in the end of the day, could I just have an Eze or whoever it is sitting there? I've decided to side more on that side these days. So I haven't got Foden in my team, but as you were saying right at the start with this template or break thing, like it's very hard to break the template at the moment if that's what you want to do. Like I don't think you have to do that by any means, but if you have decided you don't want the same team as everyone else, then obviously having a Man City attacker who's probably going to play quite a lot of the minutes in some easy games definitely looks like an option to do that. So again, if someone comes to me and said, I've got him, I haven't got him, I wouldn't want to sway him either way. I say, absolutely fine. You could do fantastic with that. Good luck with it. I think he's a good pick.
Yeah. And then on the second part, let's say I told you in the first 8 game weeks he's going to play exactly the same minutes as Grealish. Some could be in the middle, some could be on the right. Grealish will get all the minutes on the left. Is he then better than Grealish?
I think he probably is, just because there is a chance he does that Gundogan role in those easy games, and it pretty much ends up being the second striker. You can see today just how direct he is towards the goal as well, and I know it doesn't necessarily translate into the points, but his data is slightly better than Grealish's, more towards the goal side, which is what you want for midfielders as well. And I think with him, it's always that leap of faith that could it be better if he's given that time and he is playing more that almost second striker role. I think it could be, so potentially it could go up. So yeah, I think he is probably better. But again, if you want the minutes, Grealish is, like you said, right there, and he is probably going to play all of these games. There's a very, like we just talked, if they are winning those games 4 or 5-0, and Grealish is on the pitch for every goal that's involved, he is going to end up getting goals and assists. There's no two ways about it. So I think he's a very underlooked pick, to be honest, Grealish. It's almost not mentioned at all in the community, but I think it's because of obviously what we said. He's a facilitator on the wing. His numbers haven't been that good. I understand that argument, but if you're chancing 8 or 9 good fixtures and you want a big piece of it in terms of the minutes, then Grealish is definitely the one to go for.
It feels like to me, and obviously this is my personal opinion as a non-City expert, feels like an Edison pick, Grealish. Like if you have double game weeks, 3 or 4 double game weeks in the next 8 weeks for Man City, go for an Edison or a Grealish because you get a lot of minutes, and as part of those lot of minutes, you can then compete with certain players that have maybe slightly higher points per minute, but you're getting more minutes because of these double game weeks,
Mm.
and they're probably better off going for them. But if it's single game weeks, it goes back to at least I'm with you. Eze Mbumo are on penalties. Mitoma, if he plays, is super attacking, and his numbers are also really really good. So, do you have to go for a Foden who's a million more? People can, but it's not a necessity even if he's starting maybe 3 out of 4 games.
Yeah, I will say I've looked at the FPL team planner as well, and there's a period I think where you can almost bring Foden in. I can't remember what she's like. Maybe for Bruno Fernandes. I think the fixtures change a little bit for Man United for like a small 2 week period. You can almost do a hokey cokey, bring him in for a while, then swap someone else out. So I'm not averse to doing that. I think that might be what I do, sort of sit back and watch the first 3 or 4 weeks, see if he is playing every game, which I think he probably will, but may not, of course. And he could play right wing or eight and see what the setup is versus the teams. Is he getting involved? And if he is, then I think you can make an argument to bring him in for a few games. But I, yeah, it's like I said, if you want to go with him, I don't think he's a bad pick. You just have to be wary that it's always a battle versus other players, right? You've said just there, you're spending a little bit more money for ultimately probably less minutes, no set pieces, and no pens. So you have to hope he does very well in the minutes that he gets on the pitch for him.
It's that Man City lure. No one can avoid it. But
No.
let me ask you my last question on this formation. So we've obviously got this dearth of attackers suddenly. We were going 4-3-3, but suddenly everyone's falling off. Um, Watkins is popular, but other people who want to save some money are looking at, Pedro and others basically. And Alvarez comes into the conversation sometimes. Now, De Bruyne did come on today, but people were hoping that they could get a couple of game weeks with an Alvarez, and then Nkunku could come back, and that could be something that you could sort of work around. Of course, you don't know how fit KDB is, but your views on people starting with Alvarez, is it just complete 100% punt, or is there something more to it?
I just FPL review is very high on him as well, which I was quite surprised at, but I think that's probably linked to the minutes thing and the De Bruyne thing. I mean, ultimately in this setup, as we've just said, right, Pep might not fully trust Foden in the eight position yet, and he hasn't really played it that often. And Silva, although he can do a job there, he doesn't get the goals. So is there a world where Alvarez and De Bruyne play with Haaland? Yes, because we even saw it towards the back end of last season. It was more in the games which didn't matter anymore. But he didn't do it originally for the whole first part of the season. It was either Alvarez or Kevin De Bruyne in that spot, and then he started using them both. So could he use that in some of the easier games where he uses Alvarez and De Bruyne? Yeah, he could do. Um, but aside from that, I don't really see him. I mean, he's going to take minutes off of Haaland towards the end of games like usual. To me, he's not really a pick. I just don't think he's going to get enough minutes, but I could be wrong for the reasons I just said there with the Silva and the Foden thing. Maybe you just trust Alvarez more. I just don't think it's worked that well as well. That's the other thing. Like, I think eventually he's gonna not do it. But
Yeah, and that's the other thing, right? People, because we've been given this hand where City have the first game week, and we live in a world where there's leaks, and no one likes that, but we
mm.
have to play by the cards we've been dealt. So people hear Alvarez is starting game week 1, they jump on the wagon, and then they have a problem game week 2 when De Bruyne starts.
well, this is it. Yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't begrudge anyone doing that if they want to bring Alvarez in for that game. It's that's fine. Go ahead and do that. He may play very well. He may even get a lot of points. But can you guarantee he'll start the second one or the third one or the fourth one? I don't think you can. Um, so as a result, it's pre-booking transfers, isn't it? Probably.
Yeah,
Maybe there's a world that exists that he plays that position and he just keeps it for the whole season and he's the world's greatest player. But I think the chances of that are pretty slim.
and you
But
wait for a
maybe.
couple of weeks and then go there rather than
And
leave a
and then
guy.
you haven't really lost too much out, right? Yeah, exactly. If he's playing like 4 or 5 weeks in a row and it's just that's his spot now and he's going to play that, he is the new Gundogan, then fair enough. I think at that point you can move in. But like you say, the price will probably have only gone up a little bit and you can just move to it. So I think that's probably the least likely scenario, but it's not going to completely lock you out of it if you don't go with it.
Correct. And personally, even with Foden, I mean, if we're talking, I know we finished the Foden discussion, but we're back to the leaks discussion. Let's say he's we're told Foden is starting. I'm personally of the opinion that we've had this discussion. We've said, look, he might start. There's still other good picks. He might play 4 out of 5 games, and still there are other decent picks. So you don't have to go there. Would you have any temptation if you hear he's starting?
No, because I think he will start. So to me, if he didn't start, it will be a surprise. I think he will be starting. And I've always got temptation with Foden because I think he's a fantastic player. And I've already talked about like if he is going to play that second striker role, I think he could be great. And there's periods where he has been great. It's just the whole thing with Foden is he was pretty much nailed in Pep's team prior to this new setup and the control on wings fascination that he's got. He literally played every game that he was available for. There was always some other reason why his minutes don't look good. It will either have been an injury or we had that period where he was a little bit naughty and went out partying and other issues that Foden had. He's more a victim of the system. So until I'm confident, and Pep clearly isn't 100% because he said in the like, I don't know if Foden can play that role. Maybe we will see, and then he didn't play him today versus Arsenal. So as much as I think he will play in the weaker side teams, you're going to have that situation. They're not going to play. Occasionally they'll play like away versus. We could even say home versus Newcastle. Does he trust him 100% home versus Newcastle? I don't know. We'll have to see, won't we? We'll have to gain that information. Where's his kind of threshold of where the team is, where he's not happy to trust it? So that's the kind of stuff that's in the back of my mind where I wouldn't be happy to move to it personally.
Awesome, awesome. All right. I mean, it can't be a Man City pod without talking Haaland. He got 0.0 xG today. Obviously, it's just a friendly, but I wonder if this was the first, his debut. If this game happened last year, where he got 0.0 xG, what the narratives would have been. Anything you've read? You follow these guys very closely in terms of his fitness. Anything you've seen in preseason, or Haaland is Haaland, and we just go with it.
I don't think you have to worry now. I think the one comment Pep made was actually he's fitter this when he's come back this time than he was last time, or something like that. But you don't know how much of what Pep says things in the media, not always for the benefit of the people listening to it, if that makes sense. It's for people in his team, for other situations to save face. Like who knows? You can't read much into that. All I know is Haaland is fit. He's obviously starting games, and it's not going to take him long to start sparking into action. We've been here before, like you say. I think he had I looked. I think it was only like 3 completed passes in the first half. Doesn't matter, does it? It doesn't matter. I still don't think. On a side note, I still don't think they've actually worked out the best way to actually play with Haaland still to this point. But that's a scary thought. He still manages to bang in 35 goals or whatever it is when they haven't 100% found the best way to set up with him. But it's more about this system. Pep's not bothered about that. He's more about just smothering the game and getting the win, which is this system seems to do most of the time. So,
Right.
yeah.
Excellent. So that was the base case. We're going to go through the others quickly because I've asked pretty much my minutes questions here. But I just went through the team one. So Luke, now I've got team two up here. When does Pep use this one?
So yeah, this was the kind of variation one we had today. I think this is going to be in the bigger games. So you're going to see Kovacic come in as one of those eights and end up sitting a little bit deeper than this has shown, like the Arsenal game. Stones maybe will invert or maybe not, and Walker maybe will push on down the right or maybe not and sit. So we'll probably see essentially Kovacic come in for one of the eights and sit a little bit deeper. That's probably the main one. That's probably going to be in the games versus the best opponents.
Right.
I think. Yeah.
Excellent. And then I've got team three up here. This looks very scary. I mean, two defend, basically two at the back, three in midfield. Go talk us. When does he use this?
Yeah, so this is kind of an experimental one. This is some chat that I've seen online, to be honest, and theorized in some circles. It's actually not the scariest he's ever been. There's been times when he's actually used only the four back and then used six attackers, like when he played versus back fives versus Spurs.
Okay.
That's what he was doing. So only four players back, and he's kind of got done away with that because I think Spurs have just given him too many nightmares essentially, where they kept managing to beat him and score. So he just kind of abandoned that system pretty much, and he's gone for 5-5. So this is like a slight variation where people are theorizing that Gavridol could essentially do what Stones does at the same time. So they both invert at the same time into midfield along Rodri. It's still the five back. It's just rather than the three defenders, you have the three midfielders. So he could use this again. This would kind of be those home Forest games where he just leaves Akanji and Diaz or whoever it might be as the two centre backs there. It could be Ake and Diaz as the ball winners or the ball sprayers, and then he uses these three guys to massively push on and puts as many forwards on the pitch essentially as he can as a result. So I think that's all of these systems have like a slight tweak of the back five more than anything. That's where you're going to see most tweaks. Well, it's where they've got the most options, so it's the most likely, and that's the difference between the formations. So we haven't seen that yet. I think Gavridol is the one. Ake can't really do that, so it's really going to be a Gavridol thing. So that remains to be seen if it happens.
Okay, excellent. Scary, but excellent. And then you obviously talked about the fourth formation, which is what he played today with the fullbacks pushing forward, and then Diaz, Stones, and Rodri basically not staying back. We did talk about this. Palmer, I think, I see in this formation obviously because this is how he played in the second half. What do you think of him? I mean, if he could get a lot of minutes on the right, not an FPL option, but more in general.
Yeah, I mean, as the squad stands, if they don't manage to sign anyone as a winger, then he will end up getting more minutes. Not necessarily in the Premier League, but he's definitely going to play a bigger part. It's been a bit unfortunate, Palmer. I think sometimes he looks pretty bad, Palmer, like he's not a particularly good player, and other times he looks really good. I've been to watch Man City live a few times, and every time I've watched Palmer, he's actually been really good. But yeah, he also is quite injury prone. For a young kid, he seems to get injured a lot, which I think has hampered him. I think Pep would be willing to give him a go if they don't sign a winger. Like we know Man City will try to sign a winger, but at the end of the day, if the deal's not right, then they've done this before where they'll just go with what they've got. They won't just do something stupid. They'll stick to their guns essentially on the players that they want. And as a result, we've already just talked about it. Silva plays in the big games as a winger, and then he's not happy with Foden because he doesn't offer as much control out there. Then, as a result, you will see Palmer feature in the right wing, and they're going to have to because they've only got three wingers in this setup. So he's going to have to take some minutes in the Premier League. I think it would be quite rare from the start, to be honest.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Luke. I just wanted to before we end and conclude, I just wanted to remind people, if you can join our Discord channel, become a Patreon or a member. We've got fantastic prizes this year. So we'd love for you to like, subscribe, join as a member, so you're part of it before the season starts. And yeah, just thank you, Luke, for coming on. People, I do enjoy your Inspect Goals podcast. You guys have got Ben Krillin, Seb this year alongside Sam. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we'll do it every Thursday. Well, not every Thursday, but most Thursdays if we can. And yeah, Inspector Goals on YouTube, and at Inspector Goals on Twitter. And yeah, like you say, got Ben Krellin on board this year to help us with fixtures. Typical, it ends up being a season where there's probably not going to be that many fixture issues, but yeah, obviously good to have him on board. And Seb Wessel from Scout as well. So just mainly looking at the analytics, really. I think that's obviously the way the game's going these days. Some people like that, some people don't. But using FPL review and models and just discussing the numbers is pretty much what we do on that pod. So not for everyone, but if you're into that kind of world, then come check it out. That'd be great.
In fact, before we end, I wanted to ask you personally. I mean, you obviously became a much more analytical manager last year. How was that journey for you? Did you think, have you gone too deep into it? Do you want to pull back, or do you think that you didn't, you want to go further and develop more as an analytical manager? What's your position on that this year?
No, I personally don't think I'm anywhere near deep enough. To be honest, I'm still holding on to my old my old self. Like I want to take these punts that they wouldn't necessarily punt, and I watch a lot of football, and they do too as well. So I don't want to say that they don't. In most cases, everyone's an individual, but I still have my urges of, I've been playing this game for a long time. So at the end of the day, you think you're right or try and back yourself in certain situations and do better. So I need to almost get rid of a lot of that, to be honest, to go more along those lines because these guys play it so well. I mean, the proof's in the pudding. The last 2 or 3 years, they've just absolutely dominated nearly every league setup that they've been in general. And this, at the end of the day, is a game within a game, isn't it? They are masters of this game. So I need to try and, I think, align myself more with them. But it's harder because ultimately for me, it's not as fun, really, to kind of do it by the numbers rather than do it on what you watch. It's kind of taken away from what the essence of fantasy was about. But if you want to do really well, for me, I think it's probably a pretty good way to do it. There are some people out there like Late Riser and stuff who can back themselves and do their piece, and they do fantastically well. Fair play to them. But we're not all world superstars like Late Riser, unfortunately. I wish I was, but apparently I'm not. So I've got to use the tools available to me.
Nice. No, look, I have a similar approach. I'm not as analytical, but I use data a lot in my everyday thinking. I actually use a lot of the models personally, but I use it basically as,
A sense
my
checker.
as if I'm debating between Mbumo and Mitoma and I have nothing to differentiate, and then I go on certain models prediction websites and somebody has Mitoma or Mbumo far ahead, that basically tells me what am I missing. I'm clearly missing something that I haven't looked at. So I'd look at that. I think it's great for planning when people look at
Mm-hmm.
8 week horizons, 6 week horizons, 12 week horizons on where should I go, when should I maximize the early part or the late part. So I find it fantastic. I use review, I use the scout prediction system.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think people should embrace it as one other unbiased place where you can get ideas that maybe you're not thinking of or you're not sure about. But to each their
Absolutely.
own. I think I respect everyone's way of playing it. Some people have nothing to do with looking at a spreadsheet. Some people play it that way, and that's it. Wherever you get your enjoyment, that's fair game.
Yep. Completely agree.
Excellent, Luke. Thank you so much for your time, and it was excellent. I wish you all the best for the next few days. Are you going to be at Fest, by the way?
I'm not, unfortunately. I'm working. I will get one eventually. Every time I've been working. But yeah, I'll be there eventually. I'll catch you at some point, Pras, I'm sure.
Well, that would be a pleasure. So thank you again, Luke, and everybody. Thanks for watching this. Please like if you did like this video. I'm sure you will. And see you next time. Bye.
See you guys.